Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome today to our deep dive first look at Panzer North Africa, the massive standalone expansion game from GMT Games that builds off of their existing Panzer series, covering small unit combat in World War II. This game, of course, takes us to the North African desert for World War II combat. As a special feature of this video, I'm also showing a storage kit solution from Cube for Me Games because the box is packed with stuff. And a number of people have reached out and said, how am I ever going to get the counters back in the box after I punch them out? If you want to skip ahead to that, you can use the chapter system down below and navigate right to the storage solution. So here we have it, the 6th installment in the Panzer series from GMT Games. This one designed by James Day, as he's designed all of the original ones, and joined by Fernando Sola Ramos here. Couple of things just to set the context for this one. The original Panzer game and its 4 expansions, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4, cover East Front and West Front combat. This one, of course, takes us to the North African desert from mid-1940 to late 1940, small unit actions and small unit operations. Very important to know. Unlike the other previous 4 expansions to the base Panzer game, this is a complete standalone game, as we shall see in its massive 3.5-inch box. Probably could have been a 4-inch box, to be honest, too. It is stuffed with stuff. So let's flip it over now and take a look at the back side and some of the general overview of the game. Some general overview information. It says here players is 2+. However, with the gobs of scenarios that are in the game, there are 5 that are completely solitaire friendly. They're designed for solitaire play. There's a section on the rules for executing those as solitaire scenarios. And there's very few systems in the game that I think are not solitaire friendly, really only one optional rule. We'll talk more about solitaire as we go, but I think you could legitimately claim this is kind of a 1+. I think there'd also be options for collaborative play and cooperative play, looking like team play if you would like. Ours is listed as 1 hour plus. Huge variety in scenarios in terms of size and scope and length and stuff like that. So I think some of the shorter scenarios, sure, they're going to be an hour, but as you get into some of the massive scenarios that are in here, and there is a linked 4-scenario campaign, those are going to be much, much longer. So I think you could be extending up probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 hours for some of the bigger scenarios. Plus, there's also the element in here of create your own, which we'll talk about a little bit. That could extend play more if you wanted to create something even more massive that's than what's in the game right now. In terms of gameplay, units are individual tanks and vehicles and planes, and we have squads and half squads. So very much tactical small unit actions in World War II. Turns represent about 15 seconds to 15 minutes, depending on how much is happening in a turn. So you're talking about scenarios that are measured in minutes and hours, not in days. Then the map scale is 100 meters per hex, so we're going to see a lot of ranged fire across the map board and things like that. Now, complexity here is listed as a 6. I'll talk about that inside when we look at the rules. Likewise, solitaire suitability is a 9. I'll talk about that when we look at the rules inside. Speaking of which, let's get this beast of a game open. Alrighty, here we go. First up, this is the second most amount of documentation I have seen with the Wargame. There are 6 hefty documents here. Welcome to Panzer North Africa College, everybody. Let's take these one at a time. Obviously, I'm going to move through them, relatively kind of lightly so that we don't spend an hour just looking at all the documentation. But let's start with our basic and advanced rules, which are a hefty 68 pages here. First, if we look at the layout, brilliant layout, lots of examples, lots of graphics to kind of fill them in. And if you are familiar with the Panzer series, this is going to be very, very familiar, right? So we basically got the same game system recreated here so that it's a standalone module. Now, one thing that I want to talk about, especially in regards to the complexity rating, which the back of the box rates as a 6. And I think it's actually different than that. I think there's actually 3 ratings to this game. And I want to explain a little bit why. So first up here, the basic rules, we have basic rules, advanced rules, and optional rules. And this is the manual for the basic and advanced rules. We have here the manual for the optional rules right after that. But the advanced game starts on page 22. So we have 21 pages of relatively modest text density, talking about line of sight, about the basics of gameplay. So once you get here, you can play a large number of the scenarios that only involve vehicles. So I would say this base game, if I'm giving it a complexity rating, I'm going to give it a rating of 4. Then, if we get up in here into the advanced rules, these are pretty substantial. And it's also important to note that the base game covers only vehicles. So leg units here start with advanced rules. Towed units, aircraft, all kinds of things like that are folded into the advanced rules, and you can bring those in piecemeal and gradually ramp up the complexity of your gameplay as you get more and more comfortable with the system. So a lot of things, it's important to note that the basic game isn't basic rules for all of the mechanics in the game. It's really for vehicle to vehicle. Then you fold in the advanced rules to add in things like leg units, artillery units, towed units, aircraft, and all these kinds of other things. So with that in mind, I would say that this portion of the rules here probably pushes it up closer to a 6 or a 6.5. There is a lot here and there's a lot of detail to it, but the nice thing about this system again too is how it's layered, basic, advanced, and optional, and you can fold these in at your leisure as you start to get used to the system more and more. And that also, doing that will also open up more of the scenarios that are provided in the game. Now, so again, if I were to say the complexity so far, we have 4 for the base game, 6 for the basic and advanced rules. Then there's a whole rule book on optional rules. And this is where things, even like some of the significant mechanics like leaders, are added here as optional rules. And there are 24 pages of optional rules. I think if you are playing the whole system, basic rules, advanced rules, and optional rules, this is a massive system. I mean, that's 88 pages of rules there. I think then we're kind of actually rising up into the 7 or perhaps the 8 level complexity. There's a lot here. But again, you never have to go to these optional rules. You can stick basic and advanced and still play the full game. So with that in mind, then we get to a playbook. Now this playbook is very interesting. It's about 28, 30 pages or so, adds bibliography. This is where we have things like the designer notes. And then we have a lot of guidance here for making your own scenarios. And here's where the solitaire rules sit for those 5 solitaire scenarios. So a lot of guidance here. I mean, the solitaire rules here start with, it's number 10. It starts on page 10, goes all the way up here to page 25, 24, 23 here. So a good dozen pages of solitaire rules here that are really going to, I think, flesh out those solitaire scenarios. And again, one of the elements here, I think this is very much a sandbox game, and I'll talk about this momentarily. I think the ability to design your own scenarios is just through the roof here. So if you like not only playing scenarios, but want to make up your own, this is a toolkit for that too. And I'll talk more about that as we get forward here too. So yeah, here it is right here. All kinds of guidance on designing scenarios. And we'll show some of the features of that as we look at this a little bit more. Some explanation for the scenarios. So this is really kind of a guide to some of the materials that are scattered throughout the box here. So that's 3 of 6 done. Now we have 2 scenario books. These things, they're loaded. There's 32 scenarios in the game. And again, 4 of them are linked together into a campaign game where you can play, you have a kind of a force pool. So not only you're trying to win the scenario, you're trying to preserve your force pool for subsequent scenarios. And again, these are things you can also design and stuff like that. All of these scenarios too, which are really interesting, they're layered in historical precedent. So this is where they happened and what happened, when they happened. And I believe the scenarios are listed in chronological order, with the very important exception, because one of the things that surprised me when I looked here, for example, at scenario 47, and these continue off of the expansion series, that's why they start with number 47. This is a pretty hefty scenario. You know, it's got leg units and things like that. So it's not a basic game scenario. This is a scenario we're going to need some of the advanced rules. So it's like, wow, that's a complex scenario to start with. There's 2 scenarios here in the back of this book, 77 and 78, that have very small force pools and just vehicles. So these 2 scenarios here are designed specifically for that basic game that you'll be able to play. And there are a number of other scenarios. I'm going to guess probably a dozen of the 32 scenarios that are vehicle only, and they're listed in as well. So the basic game doesn't just get you access to these 2 scenarios. There's a lot more scenarios you're going to be able to play as well. Now, the layout here is fantastic. I love the setup when they show you the images of the units and where they are. This is going to speed the setup of the game so much. I mean, it's just really nice and appreciated when there's very much a visual setup instead of just a textual-based one. Some of them have special rules and historical situation, and unique victory point conditions or victory conditions, sometimes different unique pieces of information, and then again, all set within the historical context of when and where they actually happened. So tons of stuff in here. And lastly, the last document that we have is our table of operations and equipment. This basically is kind of the order of battle, if you would, for both combatants from the Axis and the Allies in the desert in World War II. And so we can kind of go through here. And this is the guidance that the playbook gives you for using this to create historically representative force pools to designing your own scenario. And that gets at the idea here of, in a beautiful layout and everything, you can kind of pick out the units and build things and build all these different scenarios in your head and then put the maps together, and you can just create scenarios to your heart's delight. And I think the biggest thing here too gets at this idea again that not only do you get like an incredibly packed 2 manuals full of 32 scenarios, which is just a ridiculous amount of gameplay for a standalone module like this. The ability to design your own stuff. This is kind of one of these desert island games. I think you could, there's hundreds of hours in here. I mean, hundreds of hours of gameplay that are involved in this box. So in terms of value, this is a fantastic, I think, value purchase. I mean, it's not a cheap game. Let's be clear, but it's a great value purchase in terms of how much game you get in the box. I'm creating this segment of the video a little bit later because I got the whole thing done and realized I forgot to talk specifically about my thoughts on Solitaire. Back of the box gives it a 9 out of 9. I feel like that's an overstatement. It's a whole full set of Solitaire rules, but those Solitaire rules only apply to the 5 Solitaire scenarios. So the vast bulk of the scenarios, if you're going to be playing this as a solo player, you're going to be playing back and forth. Now I feel like the system is very, very Solitaire friendly, except with the exception of the hidden units optional rule, which you never need. Everything here pretty much works great as a Solitaire player playing back and forth. So for that reason, I would take it down from a 9 out of 9 to more like a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. Very Solitaire friendly, but I do feel like a 9 out of 9 is a little bit of an overstatement. Counter time, let's dig in. As one would expect with a game of this scope and scale in a box that's just stuffed with stuff, we do get a hefty set of counters. 8 counter sheets of 2 different types. We've got our 5/8 inch counters, of which there are about 700 of these. These represent the leg units and then all of the markers that are used to keep track of combat. The other half here, these 4 counter sheets here, are the roughly 300 vehicular and kind of aircraft and leader counter sheets. These are all 7/8 of an inch. And another important thing to note about these counters, there isn't a step system for these units. So you're not going to take, for example, this M1340 Italian tank here and it's going to get hit and then you're going to flip it over. The backside of all of these counters, which are printed on as well, represent completely different units. So the backside of the M1340, there's this L640 Italian vehicle as well. So you get a completely different range of units on the backside, as we shall see, as we shall look at some of the other ones that are in here. And one other aspect of these, as we shall see, there are data cards that connect to all of these different types of vehicles. We've got 49 different data cards, so one for leg units, one for aircraft, one for each of the tanks and trucks and armored cars and half-tracks and stuff like that that are in the game. So most of the information you're going to be used to execute combat sits on those data cards. This is just some of the basic information that sits here. We could spend a half an hour, I'm sure, looking at all the different counters in the game because it's just kind of a walk back in armored combat history here. And combined with the data cards, I think you could almost just use this as a reference guide. If you even never play the game, just looking at the counters and going through the data cards is a treat in and of itself. One more aside while I'm here too, as I'm looking at these and I look at all the data cards and the maps and stuff like that, I don't know if anybody else is, but I'm having so many flashbacks to the old Avalon Hill game, Tobruk. It's just bringing me right back. That was one of my favorite games when I was playing war games before that 25 year break and stuff. And I just really, I love that game. And it's bringing me right back. I mean, desert armored combat, individual vehicles, all the information, the data, hit locations and stuff like that. Feels like this is Tobruk brought back to life on steroids kind of thing. So these are our Italian vehicles in here. Great, again, a great range of vehicles for their tanks and things. We get the Italian leaders and some of the German counters sliding in here. Then this is the British counter set. And as one would expect for combat in the desert, we've got all of the representative tanks. We've got Grants, we've got Stuarts, we've got Crusaders. There's Valentines, I think, on another sheet. Sherman's up over here. Different types of Crusaders. Matilda 2s here coming in. Backside, again, has a different pool, again, with kind of some of the trucks and stuff that we'd also see. Mark 7B, I'm not familiar with that one. Crusader 2s again, and so a great range and kind of variety of British vehicles in the game here. And we go now to the Axis armor. Lots of Panzer 3s and Panzer 4s of different types and varieties and makes. Panzer 3Hs here. I know there's Panzer 3Js. This is Panzer 3Gs here. Panzer 4D, Panzer 4E, Panzer 2, Panzer 1B. That must have been early on, huh? And then backside some more. We do have some Tigers in here too, interestingly enough. And then lots of light vehicles, PSW 221s and 222s, and then half-tracks and armored cars are in here as well. So again, a pretty hefty representation of the different vehicles and ordnance that were in the North African campaign. Some more British vehicles here. Here's we have our Valentine tanks, some anti-tank guns. 88s should be in here. Here they are, the 88s for the Germans as well. And then some other German vehicles here. I could spend a half an hour looking at these. I could make an hour-long video just on the vehicles that are in the game. It's so much fun to go through those. But in the sake of not having this be an hour-long video, let's go on. Leg units, the Italian infantry. These are step-based, so they get depleted as they take casualties. So we have squads, infantry squads here, machine gun teams and mortars, and then similar sets for the Axis German units here, and then the British units as well. And then I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but these are all of the different markers that are in the game. Again, these are 5/8 of an inch, and there are about 700 of them printed on the backside with different functions and things like that. So lots of different markers that you're going to be dropping on your burning, on fire here. We've got dust, bailout, damage markers, knocked out of action, blocking terrain. Ditches here for some things. Mines are in the game as well. And this also gives you an idea, I think, of the types of orders and complexity to the combat and movement and detail that's in the game. Again, that you're gradually folding in as you work into those advanced rules and optional rules. Fire and move, move, fire, overwatch, fire, short halt, move, short halt, all kinds of things in here. Hesitation. So lots of different markers for the game. Some turret markers, more move markers, blocks, hasty movement and things too, rubble as well. So again, a quick look at some of the types of, I think the counter set there and the marker set too gives you an idea type of the actions that are going to be going on. Let's jump in and take a look at our player aids. And for a game of this complexity, it's a very light set of player aids. And I say that more out of admiration than any point of criticism, because I think they've managed to distill all of the tables down into these two player aids, and these are identical, so one for each player. They're printed on both sides, so rather than fumbling through a lot of different charts, you've got them all really here on one handy chart that you can reference. Terrain effects over here, spotting, sequence of play is here. Then we've got on the other side here a lot of the combat related ones in terms of armor piercing hits, armor piercing hit modifiers, AP hit locations, AP number of hits, combat results, fire modifiers and things, assault modifiers, hand-to-hand combat. So you get an idea of the types of things that are going to be involved in gameplay, but they've really distilled it down to a really nice set of two tables. So I think that really is going to speed up play when you've got all the information so easily accessible at your hands there. Then the other types here, there are three other player aids. These are turn markers and transport and track summaries, and then hidden unit if you're using that hidden unit mechanic that shows up in the optional rules. But we have data card keys, which basically explain all of the information on the 49 data cards in the game, and there are 4 different keys, one for aircraft, one for artillery, towed data card data, and then vehicular data card data, which of course is a big one because they're pretty complicated in that regard. So everything here, again, you need to interpret how to use those data cards. So really nice set, I think, of player aids. Let us look at our maps here. Now these are the kind of the layovers in terms of the overlay sheets you can put on top of the maps to create a variety of terrain for specific scenarios that you might either be designing or that are in the game. So we can see kind of an oasis here, some trees. There is some base ones in here too, and these are printed again, only on one side. So we've got, different, I'm not sure what this darker terrain here is yet. These are gullies that you'd see. And so these are all going to be able to punch out to kind of modify the existing maps. Here's some bases. We can see a little town over here as well. So these are used for that portion. Now, these all of the hexes in the game, by the way, the units, again, 7/8 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch. Hexes are 1 inch wide, and again, each hex across from hex side to hex side represents 100 meters. Now, there are 6 maps, and they start numbering them in addition to kind of the existing Panzer series. So again, these would be all compatible with the prior Panzer games and expansions. Again, very deserty as we look at. I'll show some close-ups on these. Again, these all match up and they can be put together. These are printed on 2 sides, so you can kind of get different scenarios and different activities. And again, you get the idea here. 6 maps, there's 12 different map sizes, these can all butted together in different ways. Just a ton of variety in terms of how you can create scenarios and all the different terrain types that you'll be able to use in the game here. So here's a hilly one. Oh, this has got a lot of height on this one. A little town on the backside over here. Really nice. I mean, these are heavier cardstock. Again, I think that the artwork on these is relatively straightforward, and I'm not going to say simple, but to a degree, it's a desert, right? So what you get is what you get in that card. But I think perfectly functional in terms of the maps and what's there. And in terms of variety of gameplay and what you can do with these, just a ton of stuff. And now we come to one of my favorite parts of this game, the data cards. Also, the game gives you some baggies and some dice. And I'll come back to this in a bit too, because I want to kind of rearrange some of these too when I show the storage solution. But let's take a look at some of these. So we get 49 of these data cards. And again, they're printed on two sides. So you get the information for the units from both sides, representative of what's on their counters as well. And we can see here too, you know, to kind of give an example of the different types of stuff that's going on. If we look at this Valentine here, there's just a number of pieces of information here to give an idea of the depth. We've got turret turn factors up on top here, looking across here, stabilization rating, types of gun sighting, rates of fire, the size of the vehicle itself in terms of how big the tank is. That's going to give some modifiers to combat as well. Ammo limits and types, and then all of the offensive information in here in terms of like armor piercing information, AP damage. This is the table that you're going to be using for this vehicle during combat. And then it's defensive information, front or rear, front side or rear, kind of information that's going on. And here's the size factor, so -1. And just lots of different mechanics that are going to fold in here to get at all of the information that's on these tanks. And just the level of research that has to go into these is just remarkable. And I'll kind of play through and I'll show some of these. I'll show some of these as we're looking at them. Here's Matilda 2s and Matilda 2CSs. Here we have the Harman Harrington Mark II. Martyrs for the Germans. I've mixed these up a little bit as I've been looking at them. Italian Semovente, M4041s. More Semoventes. M1441. You can go through here. Anti-tank guns. Flak gun here. 75 millimeter PAC 40 anti-tank gun coming in. So just tons of ordnance here. And that's one little stack. And again, there are 49 cards, but each one of them is represented on two sides. So you've got, you know, literally 100 different pieces of ordnance in the game. Here's our Grant tanks, A9 cruisers, lots of Crusader 2s, artillery batteries. Here's the leg one. So British squads, half squads, and sections are in here. And this is the mortar team, heavy machine gun and anti-tank weapons. So you'd be flipping these back and forth to look at those. So just, again, a ton of stuff. Universal carriers. I could spend an hour just looking at these. Honestly, just so much stuff in here. Mark 6Bs. We should get to the German armor here somewhere. I'm not sure we've seen it. Maybe hopped over it. Here we go. Here's some German units in here. So different stuff, Italian units. And again, you get the idea. It's literally a library of data about each one of these units that are in the game. A big, hefty pile of them. And now the big question is, when we get all the counters punched out, how do we get it back in the box? A couple people reached out on social media and said, do you think there's a way to get everything back on the box? I do put together storage kit solutions for Cube for Me Games. That's one of kind of the side hobbies that I have as well. So I'm going to be taking a couple of their storage trays here, see if I can get all the counters punched and clipped. Then I'm going to try to rearrange everything with the goal of I'm going to try to get everything back into the box with as little of a box lift as I possibly can. I'll go do that and I'll be back in a few hours. For you, it'll only be a few seconds. So it's actually 24 hours later. It took me about 24 hours to clip the counters and things. There are 1,000 of them. It's a lot of clipping. But I've got a solution that I think is going to work pretty well. And I just want to walk through it a little bit, then I'll show how it fits in the box. The first up is I used one of these tarot card trays that Cube for Me makes. These are really handy for the big cards in games. But in this case too, they were really handy for fitting in almost, well, a good percentage of the overlays. And if you look on the other side, I had to kind of, if you just dump them in, they won't fit. So I kind of arranged them. So 3, 1, you can see how, and 4 on the back here so that they're going to fit pretty well in here. It just takes 30 seconds to do that. And if you do that, you can get everyone that can fit into this tarot card box into the box, and the cover closes nicely. And then I'll show where I'm going to put this in the box in a moment. Now, just to note, there are a number of them that are much larger that they don't fit in, but I'll show how I'm just going to fit those in later. Then I was able to get all of the counters into 2 trays. This is a standard tray, and then this is their shallow tray here. The standard tray has has all of the markers, the counters that are used for markers. And then I have Italian infantry down here, German infantry here, British infantry over here. And I've got things, ideally it would be nice to spread like this out a little bit more over a couple of compartments. But space is at such a premium in this game that I really wanted to try to minimize the number of trays. Otherwise, they're just not going to fit back in. But I'm really happy with how this came out. Some of the thick counters, some of the 7/8" unit counters are over here. These are German leaders, Italian leaders, and then any counter that had a singular unit, just one of them that was a vehicle, I pulled it over here. There's only the German aircraft, the Italian aircraft, British aircraft, and this Humber Mark II/3. There's only one of those, so I put them there because I wanted every single counter, every single vehicle to be face up, so you could see one of them and know that was what was under that stack. So I think this works out really well. All the markers are going to be pretty accessible. You can see all of the markers here and be able to pull them and stuff like that. Infantry's pretty good. So I was pretty happy with how this came out. Nice thick tray, but it's not over full by any means. Here is the vehicles in the game. This is actually one of their shallow trays. So this is only 4 counters thick. So 318 of the 350 something 7/8 counters are in here. And again, with that same principle with the markers tray, every single vehicle that's face up on the counter sheet is face up here. So you can see every single one of them. Now some there were like 6 of, right? So if there were 6 of something, like this one here, there might be 2 underneath the Panzer IIGs at some point or something like that. So you're going to know they're kind of nearby here in this tray, but there's at least an example of one of them. Now this I think is going to work really well with the caveat that, you know, these are dual purpose counters. The back side of this is a different vehicle. So no matter what you do with the tray solution in this game, you're going to be flipping some things over. But by nature of the fact that every front side of a counter is face up somewhere in this display, I think it will make it pretty quick to find the trays, find the counters you're looking for setup. Now it's time to show how these will fit into the game. There's 2 options with this. I like to put the lids on the trays because I think they kind of pull out and they're a little bit easier to use. You could nest these to save a little bit of space, but I'm going to put the lids on the trays here, and then we will show how it all fits back into the box here. So we are set to go. Let's take a look at how we get it back in the box. We've got our counters in trays, and we've got our overlays in the tarot box. Now we want to rearrange the box layout so that we can more efficiently use the space and fit everything in. The first thing is we have a lot of wasted space with this here, so we're going to fix this. We're going to get the cards and the tarot card box to use this space more efficiently. First up, we don't need the baggies, right? Because we're not using them, we're using trays. We're going to need the dice, so we'll keep that for the side. This overlay is just getting in the way, so I'm going to remove the overlay and throw it out. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to even out the layer between these card tiles, the data tiles here, the data cards, and these, and make one nice flat even layer. I'll show you what it looks like. So basically I just pulled some data cards off the top here, put them in a smaller stack, and then use the extra height so there. So this is right all nice and even. I didn't measure it anything, you can just do it kind of roughly, but roughly you want all 3 layers even. We've moved some of the data cards, we've lowered the height of all the data cards, and we've got a lot of our overlay tiles in the box. Very efficient use of space, we can tuck the dice right in there. Now that we've got the data cards and the overlays that fit in the tarot card box here, let's put the rest of the stuff in. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, but there are a couple of tricks to it. This order doesn't really matter too much here, but I like to have the counters on top. So I'm gonna put the player aids in here next. That's a nice cardboard base to give strength here. Now here is a power tip for storing manuals. The binder is the thickest part. So we have 6 of them here, and that binder is gonna be too thick on the left-hand side. So roughly what I'll do is I'm gonna invert half of them so that the binders are sitting to the outside, and that's going to make that pile not stand up as much inside the box. Normally you don't have to care about this, but in a game that's really tight where we want to minimize the vertical height of everything that's inside, that can be a trick to save like a 1/4 inch or so in the game box. Then now I've also got this little valley here, right? Because the binders are a little higher on either side. So if I feel this, it's a little higher on the outsides than the insides, which makes it perfect now for dropping in these maps because they kind of sit in the middle here. And then I've got the overlays here to use. I could probably put these underneath. I'm just going to kind of spread these out. I think eventually I might just kind of put these in just to try to minimize the height a little bit here. I'm going to just kind of spread them out a little bit. And it doesn't have to be too compact because we're doing pretty well on space now. I might eventually put these in a plastic bag and store them, but for right now I've done it that way. And then I can take our 2 counter trays. Let's put the units on top because those look cooler for visual impact. I'm going to drop those right in here. And we can see now there's just like a little bit of a lift here on the outsides and stuff like that. And if I close this up right here, it all goes in. And I've got what looks like it's about like an 1/8 of an inch, maybe a 1/4 of an inch lift on the outside of the box. If you nest those counters inside, like if I use only one lid and nest the bottom lid inside the top of the lid, there's no lift at all. But I like having that second counter, the second counter cover, the tray cover, just when you pull them out. I think it's easier to kind of organize them. They tend to not kind of move around a little bit inside the compartment, inside the box. So just for that reason, I try to not nest them unless I have to. There you have it. Tray solution, storage solution for Panzer North Africa. 1,000 counters, all punch clipped and back into the box with just a minimal lift on the box on the outside. And there you have it. First look at Panzer North Africa with a storage solution included. If you liked this first look and you want to take a first look at the original Panzer game in the series, I'll put a link to the first look video for that one right here. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great day.